The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it tore through the royal family with a force no one inside Windsor had anticipated. Princess Charlotte entered the private corridor expecting a routine conversation. Instead, she found herself cornered by Camilla, challenged over her growing influence, and reduced to tears, while William remained completely unaware. When Charles learned what had happened, the king did not merely become angry. He lost control in front of his own household. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla had chosen her moment carefully. William had already left Windsor Castle for an engagement, while Catherine remained occupied elsewhere in the residence. Windsor Castle is a principal royal home, but behind its ceremonial walls, private corridors often become places where family tensions escape public control. The Queen Consort knew Charlotte would pass through that hallway without either parent beside her, and she believed the exchange could stay hidden. Charlotte stopped when Camilla called her name. The girl expected a correction about protocol, yet the monarch's wife accused her of behaving as though her future place made her more important than senior family members. When the princess tried to step away, Camilla caught her wrist and pulled her back. She continued speaking until a household aide entered, saw Charlotte's distress, and placed herself between them. The aide led Charlotte into a sitting room and knelt beside her as the child struggled to steady her breathing. Charlotte did not first ask whether she was safe. She asked whether she had embarrassed her father. That question revealed the deepest injury. The young royal feared she had caused trouble simply by existing inside a family divided by rank, loyalty, and the future. Charles received the news during a meeting. A senior equerry, an officer who assists the monarch with official and household duties, entered quietly and spoke close to the king. Charles listened without moving. He asked whether Camilla had touched Charlotte, then asked again. His chair struck the wall as disbelief hardened into fury. The corridor record deepened the danger. Several minutes were missing, and Camilla's security officer had ordered staff to clear the passage shortly before Charlotte arrived. The meeting had not unfolded by chance. Someone had created privacy around it. Charles slammed his hand against the desk and ordered Camilla kept away from his granddaughter until every account had been heard. No title, marriage, or palace protocol, he declared, would protect anyone who frightened Charlotte. William returned in good spirits. Then he noticed the silence, the lowered eyes, and Catherine waiting behind a closed door. Before the palace could decide how to contain the crisis, the people at its center had to confront what the incident meant personally. For Charlotte, it was a sudden lesson in how cruel royal hierarchy could become. For William, it was an unforgivable breach of trust. For Camilla, the confrontation exposed a fear she had tried to conceal for years. And for Charles, the attack forced a devastating choice between his wife and his bloodline. William entered the room expecting an explanation, but Catherine's face told him the truth would be worse. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, because Charlotte was not merely their daughter. The young princess was also the child of the future king, a visible symbol of the monarchy's next generation, and someone increasingly included in ceremonial preparation, the private training that teaches senior royals how to perform public duties. Catherine described the corridor, the accusation, and the aide who intervened. William remained silent until she said Camilla had taken hold of Charlotte's wrist. He removed his cufflinks one by one and placed them on the table. Then the prince looked at his wife and asked, with frightening calm, "She touched our daughter?" Charlotte heard him enter her room but tried to smile. She insisted she was fine, hoping to stop his anger before it grew. William sat beside her, saw the red mark on her wrist, and looked away for one painful second. He told her that respect never meant accepting cruelty, and that no title gave anyone permission to frighten her. Camilla offered Charles a colder version. She said Charlotte had behaved insolently and claimed she had merely corrected the girl. The Queen Consort never explained why the corridor had been cleared, why no governess was present, or why the child's parents had been excluded. Charles listened, but every missing answer made her defense feel less like discipline and more like design. Camilla's fear had been growing for years. She had watched Catherine's family gain emotional authority inside the institution, while Charlotte's confidence and closeness to the king made the younger generation appear permanent. The monarch's wife feared history would remember her as temporary. Charlotte then remembered one final sentence. Camilla had warned that people who rise too quickly can be brought down. William understood at once. This was not correction. It was a threat against his family's future. He demanded an immediate confrontation. but Charles ordered him to wait while he questioned Camilla alone. As William stood behind one closed door, and the Queen waited behind another, the palace sensed a rivalry that had been building in silence. And now, that silence was finally breaking. The attack on Charlotte did not begin in that Windsor corridor. Its true beginning came 3 weeks earlier, during a private rehearsal that should have been uneventful. A simple change in ceremonial order placed the young princess beside her grandfather and left Camilla standing several places behind. No announcement was made. No argument erupted in public. But one expression, one whispered exchange, and one deliberately ignored instruction transformed quiet resentment into a personal vendetta that would soon explode. Charles entered St. George's Hall, expecting a controlled rehearsal, yet the mood shifted the moment officials presented the revised family procession. The hall serves as one of Windsor Castle's grand ceremonial spaces, while a procession is the formal order in which senior royals enter or move during an official event. William, Catherine, and their children stood ready, as staff tested an arrangement designed to reflect the future line of succession, the order deciding who inherits the crown. Charlotte was placed beside Charles for part of the walk. The king had personally requested that his granddaughter become familiar with major duties, because he believed confidence had to be built before responsibility arrived. Camilla was moved several places back to preserve the formal order. She stared at the gap between herself and the monarch while staff became interested in their notes. Camilla asked whether William had approved the change. A palace coordinator answered that Charles had given the instruction himself. The queen consort's humiliation deepened at once. She could not dismiss the decision as another challenge from the future king. Her own husband had placed Charlotte closer. Charlotte noticed her standing alone and quietly offered to exchange places. The gesture came from kindness, but Camilla heard pity. She rejected the offer with a cold remark and turned away, leaving the girl confused. Catherine saw the change in her daughter's face and moved closer, while William watched his wife and understood that something had shifted. Charles later found Charlotte waiting near the doorway and offered encouragement. "One day, they will look to you to steady the family," he told her. The remark was meant to reassure a nervous granddaughter. Camilla overheard every word. To her, it sounded like a verdict declaring the child permanent and the queen temporary. Camilla spoke to an aide that evening in a recorded briefing. She said Charlotte was being positioned too early, ordered a review of the ceremonial plan, and requested a chance to correct the girl's assumptions. The aide concealed that purpose when arranging the Windsor meeting. By the time Charles discovered the truth, William was already walking toward Camilla's door, and the family could no longer call what happened a misunderstanding. When William finally entered the private drawing room, no aides followed him. Charles stood near the fireplace, shaken. Camilla remained seated, refusing to appear intimidated. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the prince placed a photograph of Charlotte on the table between them and asked one question. Why had a grown woman arranged to isolate his daughter? What followed was not a royal discussion. It was a family confrontation stripped of ceremony. Charles raised one hand and ordered everyone to remain calm. The king said shouting would not help Charlotte, and he warned William against deciding guilt before Camilla finished speaking. A private drawing room is a smaller royal reception space used for family conversations away from ceremony, but that afternoon it offered no protection from the fury inside. The monarch wanted control. His son wanted truth. Camilla defended what she called household standards. The queen consort claimed Charlotte had been encouraged to believe she was untouchable, then suggested Catherine had allowed the child's future position to overshadow respect for seniority. William did not interrupt. He waited until she finished, moved the photograph closer, and asked her to repeat the accusation while looking at him. William's restraint became more frightening than anger. When Camilla repeated herself, the prince pointed toward Charlotte's face and said she was 10 years old, not a political opponent. He told the queen that his daughter had tried to leave, had cried afterward, and had blamed herself for an adult's cruelty. Camilla answered that children could be dramatic. Charles struck the mantel with his fist and shouted her name. The king's voice silenced the room. He told his wife that frightening Charlotte was indefensible, but attacking the girl's character afterward crossed a line no title could excuse. Camilla stared at him, stunned that the husband who had defended her for years now stood against her. William revealed the palace physician's documented account. A palace physician is the doctor responsible for assessing royal family members when private medical attention is required. The written note recorded a red mark around Charlotte's wrist. Camilla's expression shifted, and Charles saw it. Her denial of physical restraint could no longer survive. William placed a staff memorandum beside the photograph. It showed that Camilla's office had ordered the corridor cleared before Charlotte arrived. Witnesses had been removed. Privacy had been created. The meeting had been planned. William faced his father and delivered the final boundary. Camilla would never approach his children alone again. If Charles refused to enforce that protection, the Wales family would leave Windsor before nightfall. The king had preserved a marriage, a crown, and a wounded family for years. Now he had to decide which bond carried greater authority. By midnight, the royal household had divided into separate camps. Doors that once remained open were locked. Staff instructions were rewritten. Shared appearances disappeared from calendars. Camilla had not lost her title, but she had lost something more immediate: access. For the first time since becoming queen consort, she could not move freely through the family she believed she had finally secured. And upstairs, Charlotte was still asking whether the argument was somehow her fault. Charles acted before dawn. The king ordered Camilla's staff removed from shared family scheduling, redirected her security team along separate routes, and required written approval before she could contact any of the Wales children. Queen consort is the title given to the wife of a reigning king, but it does not grant unlimited control over private family access. That distinction now carried devastating force. Camilla discovered the change at an internal door she had passed through for years. Her security pass failed. A protection officer apologized and explained that new access protocols, the rules controlling who may enter restricted royal areas, had taken effect immediately. She said nothing. The queen turned away, pulled off her gloves, and stared at her trembling hands. Catherine faced a different kind of damage upstairs. Charlotte admitted she wished she had never attended the rehearsal, because then no argument would have followed. The Princess of Wales drew her daughter closer and told her that silence would have protected the wrong person. Charlotte had not created the crisis. She had told the truth, and that truth required courage. The consequences spread into public duty. Staff quietly revised a planned family appearance, removing Camilla's name from the briefing document, while keeping Charlotte beside Catherine. A briefing document is the written plan explaining who attends an engagement and what each person must do. The decision carried a clear message. The child would not be hidden to protect the adult who frightened her. Camilla refused to accept defeat. She began drafting a private statement claiming William and Catherine had organized a campaign against her. The message was intended for selected allies who might defend her, but one uneasy staff member warned Charles through a confidential telephone call before it left the room. Charles entered her suite, lifted the unsigned pages, and tore them in half. The monarch told Camilla that using public sympathy against Charlotte would end their relationship in every way that mattered. Camilla looked at the torn statement and asked whether he still loved her. Charles could not answer. His silence was colder than anger, and it pointed toward the private conversation he now had to face with William as both a father and king. The following morning, Charles asked William to meet him in the small library where they had once argued about duty, marriage, and the future of the monarchy. This time, no private secretaries waited outside. No briefing notes sat on the table. The king removed his signet ring and placed it beside him, a silent acknowledgement that the conversation would be between father and son. What they said in that room changed the crisis from a battle for control into a reckoning. William entered carrying years of anger he had never fully expressed. The prince had long believed his father protected fragile relationships until the damage became impossible to ignore. Charles, meanwhile, had always feared that his son judged him without understanding the loneliness behind his choices. A signet ring is a personal ring once used to press an official seal into wax. But here, its removal meant the monarch was setting aside rank. William spoke first. He said his fury was not only about Camilla. The future king could not forget that Charles had delayed the confrontation after learning Charlotte was hurt. That hesitation reminded him of childhood moments when painful truths were softened, postponed, or buried because facing them would have damaged the adults around him. Charles did not defend himself. The king admitted that he had spent so many years fighting to give Camilla legitimacy that he stopped seeing when loyalty became blindness. Legitimacy, in royal life, means being accepted as having a rightful and respected place within the family and institution. His voice broke as he acknowledged that Charlotte had paid the price for his refusal to recognize the danger sooner. William leaned forward and made the stakes clear. This conflict was no longer about reputation, ceremony, or who stood where during an engagement. It concerned a child. If they hid what happened beneath protocol, they would teach Charlotte that rank mattered more than safety, and that powerful people could escape consequences. William gave his final condition. The restrictions on Camilla had to remain permanent, not disappear when public pressure faded. The Queen Consort also had to apologize directly to Charlotte, without advisors, excuses, prepared wording, or any attempt to shift blame toward Catherine. Charles read the second instruction and signed it. The document made every protective measure indefinite and placed Camilla's future contact with the Wales children entirely under parental approval. The monarch told his son that her private place in the family would now depend on whether Charlotte felt safe, not on the title she carried. Charles then arranged one final meeting. William and Catherine would remain nearby but outside the room. Camilla would face Charlotte alone, without rank shielding her. The palace had created boundaries. Only the child could decide whether the apology came from remorse or fear. The palace tried to keep the incident private, but the altered schedules, restricted access, and sudden disappearance of Camilla from family engagements created a vacuum that could not hold. Within hours, the story moved beyond Windsor's walls. Yet the public reaction was not driven by constitutional analysis or palace rivalry. It centered on one image: Charlotte arriving beside William, holding her father's hand more tightly than usual. William understood the danger before the first question was asked. Details of the confrontation had reached the press because too many household changes had become impossible to hide. Staff schedules had split, private routes had changed, and the Queen Consort had vanished from a planned appearance. A reigning consort is the spouse of the monarch who shares ceremonial duties, but does not hold the sovereign's constitutional power. Restrictions against someone in that position carried enormous weight. Buckingham Palace responded with a short written statement confirming that private family safeguards had been introduced. The palace is both a royal residence and the administrative center from which official communications are issued. Its wording avoided names, accusations, and explanations. Yet, the refusal to deny the confrontation told the country that the crisis was serious. William arrived outside St. George's Chapel with Charlotte beside him. The chapel is the royal church within Windsor Castle, used for worship, ceremonies, and major family occasions. A journalist called out, asking whether the young princess was safe. The prince stopped, looked toward his daughter, and answered with controlled force. She is protected, and she knows she is loved. Charlotte remained composed, but she did not release her father's hand. Supporters called her name as Catherine stepped closer and rested one hand on the girl's shoulder. The Princess of Wales did not speak. She did not need to. The three of them presented a single message: the child would not face the consequences alone. One newspaper captured that feeling on its front page. Charlotte appeared between her parents beneath the headline, "The child the crown chose to protect." The story was no longer framed as a struggle between William and Camilla. It had become a moral test of whether royal power existed to shield rank or defend the vulnerable. Crowds gathered near Windsor Castle, carrying flowers and handwritten cards. Palace staff later delivered the messages privately. Charlotte became emotional when she read one simple sentence: "You did nothing wrong." Camilla watched a broadcaster call the restrictions Charles's defining act of grandfatherly loyalty. The Queen switched off the television and rose slowly. The country had delivered its judgment. Now she had to enter the room where Charlotte was waiting, because the final verdict belonged to the child she had tried to intimidate. There was no throne in the final room, no photographers, and no ceremonial language. Charlotte sat beside a small table while Camilla entered alone. Outside, William waited with clenched hands. Catherine remained close, and Charles stood farther down the corridor, knowing the monarchy's moral authority had narrowed to a single question: would the adult who abused her power accept responsibility, and would the child she frightened be given the freedom to answer without pressure? Camilla sat opposite Charlotte and began with caution. The Queen Consort said their conversation had become more heated than intended, as though wording could reduce fear to a misunderstanding. A consort is the spouse of a monarch, but that title does not grant authority over a child. Charlotte said nothing, and her silence forced the woman before her to abandon the language of self-protection. Charlotte spoke. She said she had been frightened, her wrist had hurt, and she believed nobody would trust her account because Camilla was queen. The young princess did not accuse her with anger. She described what happened. That honesty removed the defense the woman had carried into the room. Camilla lowered her eyes and admitted that jealousy had shaped her actions. She confessed that Charlotte's closeness to Charles made her feel replaceable, and she had directed an adult fear toward a child who had done nothing wrong. The Queen apologized without blaming William, Catherine, staff, or pressure. Now she accepted that insecurity explained her conduct, but could never excuse it. Charlotte accepted the apology, then set her boundary. She did not want to be alone with Camilla again. Her answer was calm, clear, and final. William later held his daughter close and told her that forgiveness never required surrendering safety. Catherine repeated that Charlotte had shown courage by speaking when silence would have protected the powerful. Charles heard the account through a briefing from William and Catherine. The king then informed Camilla that every restriction would remain permanent. She would keep her public title, but she would hold no private authority over the Wales children and no influence over their ceremonial preparation. Charles did not end the marriage, yet he refused to erase the consequences. Affection could not repair trust by itself. Royal rank could not command forgiveness. Charlotte emerged with quiet strength, William with uncompromising resolve, and the monarch with a deep understanding of where loyalty must end. The monarchy survived because it listened to the youngest person in the crisis and refused to make her carry the cost of an adult's ambition. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.